Assalamu alaikum and welcome everybody to this webinar on KP's urban issues, which are of great significance to the development of KP. We have a terrific panel put together by CDPR in close consultation with SEED, which is SEED is the co-host and the sort of the prime mover of the webinar. So I'm not going to take much time. I'm here to just a few words on the context and what this arrangement between SEED and CDPR is, and then I'll hand it over to Hassan and Rihanna. Basically, a lot has happened in KP in the last 20, 30 years to KP's economy. We've seen deindustrialization, unfortunately, but at the same time, we've seen a huge boom in remittances and the growth in commerce and in the property sector. So there's been some bad news, but there's also been some very good news. This is as far as KP citizens are concerned. The government has also taken several actions. We've had the 18th Amendment, which has resulted in substantial increase in resources transferred to KP to spend for its own development needs. We've had PTI, a second term of the PTI, a second term government after a gap. So there's continuity. We've had FATA districts being merged into KP, and we have had a return to a much more secure environment. So this has been on the government side, on the governance side, if you like. And meanwhile, we've seen the huge movement of people from rural to urban areas. Of course, there's considerable variation across districts, and that's one of the things that today's discussion will point out. So a number of factors that have gone on. Going forward, we will see additional factors. The government seems to be totally committed to bringing back macroeconomic stability, and the actions that it takes starting now will be very important for that. We've not seen macroeconomic stability, sustained macroeconomic stability for almost 15 years. So it'll be great if that comes back. Will give a big boost to confidence, to investor confidence. We've seen a massive increase in infrastructure related investments, CPEC related and others. We've seen these wonderful highways being completed in KP. And there's still a question mark, but there's a great hope that we will see a stable neighbor across the border. So with all of these things going on, the question is, what kind of growth can we expect going forward? In particular, what role will cities play? Will they become clusters of agglomeration and sustained growth? Like it seems that you can think of it as a sort of a golden triangle of KP, which is Mardan, Nowshera, Peshawar. Will we see more such clusters coming along the Western corridor also? Will we see this cluster delivering much better services, particularly education and skills? Because that's what we'll need to take advantage of these new investment opportunities. So all of these questions are to be addressed by today's panel. In some sense, today's event is the second such event in this series. The first one focused on property taxes and sort of city finances. And this steps back and gives a broader context to that first webinar that we had. And hopefully going forward, we will have much more specific webinars. The key thing is going to be, by all means, formulate good policies. But if we don't assess the impact of those policies in a systematic fashion, using evidence, we just don't know whether what we are doing is right and how we should fine tune what we are doing in order to move in the right direction. So with these few words, let me hand it over to Hassan first, and then Rihanna to get the discussion going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sab. I welcome everyone on behalf of SEED. SEED is Sustainable Energy and Economic Development. It's a program funded by UK Aid, working for government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And one of the objectives we are working towards is improved urban economic planning, as well as mobilizing greater levels of public and private investments. We have been working very closely on key sectors like energy, and we have been working with planning and development department and other areas. But the urban space is something where we have not kind of penetrated as much. And government has tasked us to develop some thinking and give them some policy choices around various aspects of urban policy. And that is how and why SEED has partnered with CDPR. And as Dr. Saab said, that it's going to be a series. Now, the series would also include aspects of urban governance, urban infrastructure, but more importantly, today's topic, urban economy. And when we look at KP and Pakistan, we have had various discussions on urban governance, urban infrastructure. But I think urban economy has not gotten that kind of attention it needed in the recent past. Having said that, cities' economy have been growing, and cities have been engines of growth. But I think right now we are in a fix. Okay, how do we go and where do we go from here? Do we transform the economy? Do we kind of broaden the economy? Do we promote urbanization? Do we invest much more in cities and keep this trend of urbanization going on? And these are some of the questions that will feed into possibly some kind of a policy mechanism for the government to stimulate urban economy. And this event and this roundtable is a very important part of the discussion, along with a policy note that we are developing. And we also have Dr. Amar Malik, who is leading the work with CDPR on developing that policy note. So this is part of that exercise. So with that introduction, I'll hand it back to Dr. Ijaz Nabi and Dr. Rihanna for a very enlightening discussion. Please stay with us. Looking forward to a very engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's great. My name is Rihannaraza. It's good evening. It's good morning here in Washington. My name is Rihannaraza, and I'm at the Urban Institute here in Washington, D.C., which is a nonpartisan research center that works on both domestic and international policy issues. I'm formerly also a senior economist at the World Bank and was the director of ideas, and I currently serve on the board of CDPR. So it's a great honor to actually be moderating this session, and it's an honor to be here with such an eminent panel with former colleagues and friends. So I've been asked to say a few words to sort of frame, or to sort of my few thoughts on framing the discussion. And to be transparent, I'm not an urban specialist or an urban economist, but I do work now a lot more on local government and fiscal decentralization in Nepal and Kenya and other countries, as well as on issues of human capital, all I think which are relevant to this debate on this issue of cities and their roles in growth. More of my work, interestingly now, is also on OECD countries, and I sort of thought about how I'd frame it, and invariably my context is part of how I will frame some of my thoughts on the discussion, and it's partly, I think, that there's to say that it's a critical time here in the US and among the OECD countries, where now significant funds are now available for structural reform. And it's an exciting time to rethink cities, which are reeling in the aftermath of COVID-19. And at the Urban Institute, where I'm based, we're doing a lot of thinking, not just on the hard, but also on the soft infrastructure post-COVID, to ready cities for the potential challenges and opportunities of the next century, and to address the sort of systematic inequalities that have been built into them and which have fed into the pandemic and exaggerated the fallout. And there's a clear recognition that inequalities in cities are built in, and they fundamentally impact the economic vibrance vibrancy of those cities. So as Ajaz said, these are interesting times in KPs. There's a lot of policy stability, or the environment policy is very stable. The 18th Amendment, the integration of FATA into the administrative structure of the province, and I think that poses challenges and opportunities as well. Stable political government under the stewardship of the same party, so that seems to imply consistency in policy, and overall an improved security situation, although that could change, I think, in any moment. So it's going to be interesting to hear from Amar as well as the other panelists on what they have to say on which specific policy issues will be critical to propel KPK's urban economy forward, and how it can be a central part of the growth story there. I just want to say that I think, based on how I started, that I think any strategy for KPK cities must, however, also think beyond the hard infrastructure that we often talk about. Rapid urbanization further potentially speeds up through greater industrialization, puts pressure on water supplies, sewage, the living environment, and public health. And I think the pandemic has revealed that the underlying inequalities that exist in cities and what it implies for, and what those inequalities imply for access to amenities and opportunities for those who live there, fundamentally impact how cities perform and economic growth. I think cities that are segregated by occupations, by access to housing, healthcare, transport, can paralyze cities. And if these things are not addressed, I think in the context of OECD, there's a lot of thinking about building back better. And although not everyone is au fait with that terminology, however, there's a real grappling with thinking about cities through a systems lens to understand how different systems in cities are interconnected and impact economic outcomes. And there's a real engagement around, I think, the quality of government, not just in terms of the administrative capacity of government, but also representative and democratic governance, which represents people and their preferences. So I hope in today's discussion, we will hear about some of those issues. And I think all those issues are important in thinking about the role of cities in KPK's growth, particularly thinking about structural inequality, the human infrastructure, but that not just human capital, but also the care economy, and institutionalized qualitative and representative quality and representative government. So those are my sort of starting thoughts. And so let me introduce the panel, and Amar, and hopefully Amar can move on with his presentation. We have Dr. Adeel Shah, who I'm not quite sure has joined. He was going to join a bit late, who is the Executive Director of the Urban Policy Unit in the government of KPK. And he was also held the post of being the DC Charsada. Dr. Amar Malik, who will be giving the main presentation, is a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is the ex-director of the research at Evidence for Policy Design at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's a non-urban resident at where I am at the Urban Institute, and works on projects based on transport policy, urban resilience, refugees, migration, women's economic empowerment, foreign assistance programming, and water financing. His research has focused on spatial urban forms and their economic implications, political economy, public service delivery, and the distributional effects of urban public transport. And then Victoria Delbridge is the head of the IGC Cities That Work initiative, which is based in the UK, where she's working to develop a network of economists, urban planning practitioners, and policymakers to translate economic research into clear urban policy guidance. Her current research interests include urban land use and planning, public infrastructure and service provision, urban employment, municipal finance, and city-level data strategies. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Amar, and we'll look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Rihanna. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I'm just trying to get the right document to load here. Just give me 1 second. Oh, thank you everyone for the introduction. And first of all, I'd like to thank CDPR and SEEP for giving me the opportunity to think about some of these issues. Of course, the context is very well explained by Dr. Ijaz, and Rihanna, please stop me if I exceed the time limit of 20 minutes, but I'll try to keep it to that. So the title of my talk today is also the subject of a policy note that I've put together. It's called Stimulating the Urban Economy in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, from infrastructure investments to social welfare. And as you'll see throughout my presentation, I look at infrastructure on the one hand and social welfare as the twin focus areas of this government. And I think that the road from one to the other goes through cities. So to begin, I wanted to give you a summary of my key messages. First key message, and this is just in case you don't have time and you have to go home. This is for me the main crux of the presentation. First of all, KP's economic strategy appears, in my view, to be focused on two objectives. One is large infrastructure investments, and the other is improving social welfare. The government's recent budget just confirmed both of these things. We're seeing a lot of action happening on both fronts, which is exciting. The second key message is that the path from industrial policy or industrialization toward prosperity, which I mean prosperity is money in the hands of ordinary people on the street, goes through well-functioning cities that work for all. And I'll explain later what I mean by working for all. There's lots of concerns here that I think we need to address as the economic system ramps up its pace. Third key message is that there are massive variations across districts on key indicators, both of human development and degrees of urbanization. And we should not look at this as necessarily a negative factor. It's just a reality or the path dependency on how the province has got where it has gotten. There is obviously a high growth, high productivity, well-connected area in the middle, the Peshawar Valley that Dr. Ijaz Nabi was talking about. But then there's also the newly merged former FATA districts, where the level of urbanization, the degree of human development is quite different. So I think the government, any economic strategy has to take into account these variations. And then as I'll explain in my three key recommendations for this policy brief is, to move from industrial policy to better economic outcomes, you need complementary policies, you need serious governance reforms, and you need to improve public service delivery. I think these are the three crucial elements that, when put together, will make things work for the province. Now, the objective of today's presentation is to provide some initial insights and what I think are actionable recommendations for the government's consideration. But I'm so glad to see such a big turnout today at the event, and I really hope that this will also be an opportunity for you to weigh in, and that together for us to think through some of these issues so that I can fine-tune some of our thinking as we take things forward. So thinking of the conceptual framework, as I said, I see two very big priorities taking place right now. Through the CPEC, there is new industries being created through special economic zones. There's power plants, of course, and KP, as you all know, is big on hydropower. So there's a lot of action on energy, new things happening. And then there's also highways and connectivity. As Dr. Ijaz was saying, there's been unprecedented improvements in connectivity. Recently, the Peshawar-Islamabad motorway is a good example of that, where it really has improved people's experience of traveling from one city to another, both within the province and outside. But on the other hand, the government recently has put out some really big allocations for key social welfare indicators. We all know about the Sehat Insaf card and the health sector, but education, this year, the government has put in more money than it ever has. So the government's focus very much is on social welfare. And as I will try to explain during my presentation and the policy note is, I think getting urban policy right is absolutely critical. I think these two things need to be connected through the thread of urban policy. And what I mean by that is we need cities that provide high quality public services like water, sanitation, trash removal, and offer good quality of life for residents, both current and future. And I also argue that cities need to be empowered to take ownership of their own affairs. in ways that have not been seen in this country before. But I think it's really critical for the local level to feel ownership over economic policy and economic development. Now, specifically, there's two ways I think that I'll try to explain, and hopefully you agree with my concept. First is, when new industries come, they should bring new technologies. You see up here, I'm putting new technologies. What I mean by technologies is not just new machinery or new apps and new things like that, but also management practices. We need to create a system where our local firms are able to make full use of new technologies and become more productive and more economically competitive internationally. And ultimately, when that happens, more investments will come to these firms. They will create more jobs, and the jobs that exist will become higher paying jobs. So that's one very clear channel that connects the two. And similarly, when there is improvements in regional connectivity, in theory, you should see markets becoming more efficient. As you know, the cost of transport, especially for some commodities, is non-trivial. So when the safety factor and the timeliness and the cost of travel goes down, consumer prices should reflect that benefit. And ultimately, that too becomes a social welfare. And this is because highways in Pakistan have undergone a massive scale of improvement in the last 5 or 6 years. I think Pakistan's national highway transport system is now in a much better place. And I think we need to see some benefits of that coming in terms of social welfare for people and lower prices. Now, I talked about how there is massive variations in the province's districts. So we put together this chart where you'll see that on the bottom, I have all 30-something districts. This is all data taken from the two census, the 1998 census and the 2017 census. So these are official numbers, and I'm taking the definition of urbanization and population, everything from the census. So this line that you see, first of all, is showing you the rate of growth, annual average between these two time periods, and the two bars that you see here. For example, in Aptabad, you'll see the population, the yellow was 1998 and the blue is 2017. So what you'll see here is an interesting pattern where on the one hand, you'll see in Peshawar, the population has more than doubled. You see, it was in 1998, we were just above 2 million. Now it's over 4 million. So it's massive growth, and the average growth rate is also quite high up here. Whereas there's other areas like Dir Upper or Dir Upper or Aksai, where there's been more stability in the population. So there's two very different experiences. And in addition to the Peshawar, Mardan and Nowshera area that Dr. Ijaz was also talking about, where there's been massive growth, and it's very evident, anybody who travels in the area will know this. I was also interested in seeing that D.I. Khan, all the way in the south, has also experienced quite rapid population growth. D.I. Khan's population has also increased quite a bit during this time period. Now, keep in mind, these are total population numbers, not necessarily urban populations, but I'll come to that in a minute. Now, few other interesting factors which I try to pull together from the Bureau of Statistics. First of all, in the area of higher education, there are, in 2014, there were about 35,000 students across the province enrolled in 4-year degree programs in universities at the bachelor's level. Out of those, the 4 top districts of Peshawar, Mardan, Swat, and Aptabad all had about 3,500 or so students. So these are the areas where a lot of students go to get higher education and get skills. But then there are 18 out of 33 or 35 districts which have less than 1,000 students working toward a higher education degree. So of course, this landscape might have changed quite a bit in the last 7 years. But the point I'm trying to make is that not all districts across the province are equal. Attraction of talent depends in a large part on how higher education system works and how people move. So therefore, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's stark variations. So areas like this will have will be much more likely to be the homes of industries. Now, talking of industrialization, in 2017, again, according to the Bureau of Statistics, there were about 2,200 running industrial units across the province. 647 of those, so about 1/4, are in Peshawar district alone. But then on the other hand, there's districts like Shangla and Hangu, where apparently there's almost none or very little industrialization. So you see a very clear pattern between leading and what we call lagging regions in regional economics. And I think, again, we need to keep into mind both of those. Now, as far as income is concerned, we don't get official numbers from the KP Bureau of Statistics, but SEED has sponsored a research study that I think will be launched soon, in which a team of experts, including one from LUMS, has used nightlights to estimate income levels. So while I let them explain to us later how income is calculated, but one thing was quite clear was that the highest earning income districts of Peshawar and Nowshera were more than 8 times in per capita GDP than some of the lowest earners like Dir Upper or Shangla. And I think that's really important, again, to remember that there are big variations. Thank you, Rihanna, for the reminder. I'll get a move on. Now, I wanted to show you a few maps also. On the left-hand side, you'll see this is showing the level of economic, the size of the economy as measured by nightlights. So you will see very clearly, while the colors shift because we're going from 2012 to 2018, where you'll see the darker shades emerge, which means there's greater economic activity now happening. But it's very obvious that the center of the province's economic system lies in the Peshawar Valley. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's been these blue and pink bars, which shows you how much more housing has been created, which also is an indicator of population growth. And of course, to some extent, the failure of the system to provide housing. Now, to put all of this in perspective, I wanted to put this out to you. I want you to focus on the Peshawar, Charsadda, Mardan, and Nowshera area. This red line, the red dot here is the Rashakai Special Economic Zone, where I'll come to in a minute. And you'll see that there is great proximity between Rashakai and some of the biggest population centers. And of course, as you compare this to some of the areas here toward the west or a little bit on the south, you see a big difference in the amount of nightlights. And of course, Islamabad, Rawalpindi, because being big economic systems, show a lot more light intensity. And of course, DI Khan, I mentioned here down to the south, also has been growing. But you'll see very clearly that the economy of the province is dominated by the Peshawar Valley. There's been a lot of focus on the Rashakai Special Economic Zone. So I did some analysis to try to understand, what is it about this spatial bet? Why did we pick this area in particular? And as you'll see here, this area, first of all, is only 120 kilometers from the Torkham border for the international border crossing. So any industries that locate here have easy access to Afghanistan and the markets there. It's 120 kilometers to the Islamabad airport, which means it's a massive international airport. And of course, it's only 70 kilometers from Peshawar, which again is a big city, and the airport is an international airport. But then there's areas like Charsadda, Mardan, Swabi, and Nowshera. The point I'm trying to make is that if we can provide better connectivity and create a good quality of life, Rashakai itself is within commuting distance to about 56% of the province's urban population. And that includes some of the workers who are going to work here. So I think the location is great, but as I'll try to explain in my recommendations, we need complementary investments. And what I mean by that is that we need to ensure the adaptation of new technologies and new management practices by local businesses. So as new investment comes into the country, international companies come into Rashakai, first of all, we need to build new economic institutions. And what I mean by that is not just organizations. I mean we need to create an improved business climate that matches international standards. This means we need to ensure there is competitive and open markets, that there is policy consistency. Dr. Ijaz was talking about how there's been political stability. The security situation is great, but we also need to invest in making sure that business laws are adhered to strictly, then there's fairness in the system, and that international companies that come and choose to locate in KP actually find the business climate to be conducive to doing international quality work. Of course, we also need to support the local entrepreneurial ecosystem. I know this financial year, the government has put in about 10 billion rupees towards small loans for young people, but I think we also need to build their capacity to become more entrepreneurial and try to find smart ways of integrating their business ideas and their businesses with the international supply chain. So their proximity to being close to industry is actually quite important. The other recommendation I have is that we have a lot of emphasis after the 18th Amendment on the provinces, but we haven't seen much action ever in Pakistan's history on local economic development plans. So I would argue that we need to empower our local authorities to make their own assessment of what is their competitive advantage, whether it's in the area of tourism, which is a big focus, or where they want to invest, bring in investors, or some other areas of expertise. What is it about their area that makes them special? Why should an investor come here? And what can they do to complement the special economic zones and other economic policies that are being put on board? So I think that the Board of Investment and the urban planning unit, the provincial bodies, I think can play a very important role in providing support and coordination, but ultimately local governments, I think, should be made responsible for their own economic policies. And I'll explain a little bit more if you wanted questions, what kind of things I think I have in mind. I also think that there has been a lot of, there should be a singular focus across all levels of government on economic development policies. I argue that, while we do have an administrative system which is based on districts, we also need to think functionally. By that I mean is, if as the Rashaka industrial special economic zone is being created, what districts are in sort of the catchment area of that? How can they coordinate better? Because the government has already made a massive spatial bet on that location, but to make it work, you need coordination. Where will the workers come from? Where will they live? It could be, I could see a future in which international or local workers moving to the area would want to live in the outskirts of Peshawar and commuting in. Some might live in Nowshera, depending on where they want to send their children to schools or where they like to go shopping. And I think we need to create that kind of environment which goes beyond just the hardware of development, but into governance. Now, I also emphasize local governance institutions. So first of all, I think we need to build local capacity to assess economic competitiveness, develop plans, and to deliver on them. We also need to develop some knowledge partnerships between local urban governments, businesses, and academia, so that we can create an evidence base for informed decision making. So if me as a researcher wants to go out and understand what's happening in a given district in the province, I need to understand its investment history. I need to understand the structure of its economy, the labor market, and unfortunately, all of that data is not readily available. And I think that gap can be filled by building capacity of local government institutions. Now, final recommendation I have is, as you all know, there's a background to local governments in Pakistan. My understanding of the system is that as of 2019, we do not have elected local governments in the province, and the law is being considered for a revision, and elections might take place this year depending on the COVID situation. But regardless of that detail, I think that we need to develop a local government system in which responsibilities around service delivery match the authority. I don't think we've ever had that system in our country. I think the municipal authorities must be allowed to exercise full control over their service delivery unit. So often what happens is that the services are like water and sanitation are delivered more centrally, or a body is created at the provincial level. What I argue is that elected local governments should have the authority to run their own affairs. I think that's going to lead to better public service delivery for everyone. And I want to give a special plug to making sure women's unique needs for service delivery, particularly transportation and safety, is taken into account when these new services are built. I think the labor force participation rate for females in the province is very low. I think there's a lot of human potential being wasted. And I think one of the big reasons why is because women don't feel safe moving around in the city. In our cities. And in fact, I was comparing labor force participation rates between urban and rural areas in KP, and I find worryingly that in urban areas, labor force participation is actually lower for women. which might feel a little counterintuitive, and we can discuss that. So I'll stop here. I know I probably have exceeded my time limit, but I would welcome any questions that people might have, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you for listening.
Amar, you were 26 seconds under, so you were doing pretty well. I would like to welcome Dr. Adeel Shah, who I think just joined, and we introduced you earlier, Shahzad. And I thought maybe we would start with you to begin with. Oh, sorry, this is my own alarm to make sure that Amar is on time. So anyway, I wanted to start with you, Adeel Sahib, if you're there, to ask, I'm sure, hope you heard most of Amar's presentation, but wondered if you could give the KP government's perspective on some of Amar's ideas. In particular, I wanted to ask you about the KP's government's view on the biggest levers of growth for KP, urban KP, and how do they align with ongoing investments with the CPEC initiative, particularly thinking about complementary investments, which Amar really put an emphasis on. And I also sort of smoothing out spatial disparities between these districts, where there are very, very different levels of urbanization. So Shahzad, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Hi. My apologies for joining late. I had some prior commitments, and over there they overshoot their time, so I got late a bit. I just saw the last few slides from Amar, and I really appreciate the kind of work that is being done. Few observations, maybe Amar may like to respond to it. The data which was picked from the Bureau of Statistics, I have been conveying my reservations to our higher ups as well from the P&D department. Sometimes the data that we get from the Bureau of Statistics is not reliable. Sometimes it happens. The last steering committee that we have a seat chaired by our ACS, and Umar Mukhtar Sahib was also there. The Honorable Chair also pointed out this thing, that and the process of capacity building of Bureau of Statistics is going on. But the data that is being picked up for analysis from the Bureau of Statistics needs to be counter-verified as well. So I'll appreciate if there are other sources having same kind of the data, so it needs to be verified for any analysis and any results, any outcomes that accrue as a result of this research. The other point that Madam Oksana wanted to highlight, the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa definitely, if you look at our current budget and the annual development plan that has been presented recently before the provincial assembly, the focus is on attracting investment, creating more job opportunities, because with the booming population that we have, and which is increasing by the day, by the year, so we are compelled to create more job opportunities than the two sectors which are being focused by the government. As Amar highlighted, one of the special economic zones. So many special economic zones are being planned, but the Rishikesh is a special economic zone being the special interest with the special interest of the Chinese is we have been making a good progress on it, and it's a project that can be presented. And yesterday I was talking to the MD by BOIT, and he told me that the kind of investment is coming in the Rishikesh economic zone is unprecedented. The demand now. Even they've already reached the saturation points, and they are submitting their request to the government for allocation of more land over there. But this is just one depiction of such examples. We need to create more opportunities. The other sector being focused is the housing sector. Every week, the Prime Minister holds a meeting regularly, online meeting, and the focus is how to create not only the housing facilities, thereby giving stimulus to the our construction industry and creating job opportunities as well. So, but while looking at the slides that the research that are done by Ammar, the shift from rural to urban that is going on, that's a lot. What we need to do is focus on the areas, our southern areas, our northern areas. Tourism has a great potential in northern areas, so we can create job opportunities to stop this influx of the people coming from. You showed in your presentation, like in your graph, the population growth in Peshawar is tremendous. The growth is I think it's around 3. It should be around more than 3% as far as population is concerned, because the people from all the districts, they are coming to the Peshawar Valley, whether it's Nowshera, Peshawar, Charsada. So we need to focus on other districts as well. Look at the slide. Look at this Peshawar, and you have highlighted in red. And on the other hand, there is Torghar and Diyai Khan. So there is a clear shift. People coming from within the province towards Peshawar. So the points definitely highlights the population influx that is going on mainly due to various reasons. There is employment, there is education, there is better health facilities. So we can talk. I can talk and on and on and on. But I want to get the feedback from you people as well. What the Ammar has presented. My team is here. If they have any point, then definitely they will also chip in and give their viewpoints as well. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shahzad. I wanted to also ask you, I mean, Ammar has put a lot of emphasis on local government in parts of his discussions today. And, you know, we are in an impasse in Pakistan where local government is concerned, and you've served as DC Charsada. So, you know, maybe you could highlight what the challenges are of doing planning and development generally with a lack of local government. You know, there seems a gap in local institutionalization. Previously, the system ended of DCMs, and then now we don't have anything that has moved in. So what are some of the challenges that brings about in terms of actually planning for sort of spatial sort of development, and if you could highlight some of those issues, that would be very interesting for us.
Thank you. A very important point. First, the good news, today the government has announced that, Election Commission rather has announced that the local government elections will be held very soon in KP province. So that's a kind of a relief for everybody. Absence of a system has its own repercussions. I mean, I have served, before joining this organization, I was serving as Deputy Commissioner at Charsada. And when I joined, the tenure was about to be completed, and after that tenure, there was a gap for more than 1 year. So we had issues in implementation and planning, because earlier one of the important things that PND did when there was a gap in the system, we didn't get the development fund, the fund of this intervening period, because we are waiting for elections to be held. So a PFC award which was announced and the funds which were given to the district, we were not having any funds for the development for for about 2 years since they completed their tenure, on the pretext that there was no district assembly, or for that matter Tehsil assembly, or to approve the development budget and to then do some expenditures. So I won't delve into technical details, but the way we managed, God knows, we had some savings from the previous development funds, and then we were doing just to routine work and trying to do some urgent development works being needed. So this gap definitely has impacted our the lower tiers, the grassroots level in all the districts. So good news is that the elections are being held. We will be having local elected representatives, because a deputy commissioner or an officer at the executing agency, a planning department, people tend to, we get the information, we get the feedback, we get the from the elected representative reps of the local areas. They come to us that this thing is required to be done, the dispensary is required, school is required, sanitation work is required. So we get feedback from local elected reps. In their absence, there has been a gap, but and which has affected the local service delivery to a greater extent over. This is one point. The other point which is important that the government is doing, and it will be there in place very soon, we were not having any land use and building control authority. And what was going on, unplanned urbanization, people were building houses, people were building markets without any planning, without any sanitation, without any electricity or gas and other amenities. Every kind of construction work was being done without any master planning. So now the bill is there, and it was debated in the last cabinet meeting to have a building control and land use authority in KP. That authority will have its offices, which has its tentacles in the districts at local level as well. Every district will be having its own land use plan. Master plans of the major cities are in the process, but the government has planned to have a land use plan for each and every district. And that would be approved by that local government, which will be in place soon. There will be approving those land use plans. And once these plans are approved, no unauthorized change and no unauthorized construction, or whatever the activity which is outside that approved plan will be allowed by the government. So it will be a big step, big boost for protecting our agricultural land, to having some sort of a planning which was lacking for the last 60 years. But the role of local government institutions, local government department, line agency is very much there, because they implement, when it comes to implementation part, these are the departments they implement, and we have been facing the issue of lack of capacity, whether these are TMAs, local government offices, CMW, public health engineering. HR is there, but the lack of capacity, which is resulting in all the misgovernance at lower tiers. Even up till now, we didn't have, now people have been recruited, but earlier we didn't have the people who have basic know-how of how to approve a building plan. But people just went there, they submitted an application. Now architects have been recruited and placed in every TMAs. Earlier it was not done. So things are moving slowly and gradually towards betterment, but scope and the gap is there, and a lot of work is needed to be done. Consultation is there for the capacity building. Schemes have been included in the current annual development plan to raise the capacity building, the capacities of all the line agencies to manage the things, because policies are there, laws, rules are there, but when it comes to implementation, we lack the capacity, we lack the will, but now the will is there. Let's hope the capacity also gets enhanced. So there will be a better situation after some time.
Thank you, Shahzab. It's good news about the KPK local government elections. So we hope the dates are announced and the other provinces will follow. I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask Victoria, actually, a question about clearly the governance challenges in Pakistan, or the lack of institutionalization of governance structures proves challenging. And on the fiscal side, clearly this creates a problem, as Shah Sahib has just mentioned, in terms of, the flow of funds becomes a challenge. And I'm doing a lot of work in Kenya, which is a similar problem we see. I guess my question is based on sort of global evidence. Is this insurmountable challenge, and how do other countries which have devolved government but have these challenges in their fiscal sort of arm of funding, how do they sort of resolve some of these to sort of manage day-to-day sort of issues of urbanization, or just sort of development, I guess, not just urbanization?
Sure. So thank you, Dr. Raza, and thank you, everyone. It's a great opportunity to be with you here all today. So maybe just to sort of provide some context before I answer the specific question about sort of the fiscal challenges and overcoming that. But I think as we've seen from the presentations, we know that sort of cities are pivotal for growth, and the reason behind that being around the density of people that facilitates these transfers of ideas, transfers of skills, of people in close proximity, and the formation of local value chains, which happens when firms cluster together. And just thinking about the actual role of local government being around facilitating these interactions. So as Mr. Shah was saying, ensuring that sort of planning, bylaws and zoning allows for the clustering of firms, that workers are connected to jobs either through affordable housing, which is close by, or through safe and efficient transportation systems. And also just in general that citizens are afforded access to basic services and infrastructure that will foster the well-managed density. So, counteracting the downsides of density, such as crime, traffic issues, and sort of the issues of contagion and disease. The second part being really around coordinating different actors and the regulatory structure being reliable and predictable. So needing to be able to work with local universities, the local business community, NGOs, and others to understand what their demands are. Are schools and universities supplying the skills that are actually needed in the job market? Do people have access to education that's relevant? Does that education sort of match the job market requirements? And I think that links to what Dr. Malik was saying about the knowledge partnerships and that need for fostering that sort of local community of understanding and data and knowledge, and sort of getting all the local actors working towards what they see as a common vision and strategy for a particular city, and then taking sort of the necessary steps to achieve that. And then going back to the point about being reliable and predictable, I think that's one of the fundamental criteria for investment, that we, give investors the confidence to invest in particular cities or industries, knowing that they can rely on sort of a local government to do whatever it takes to sort of make the necessary investments in infrastructure and services to make things happen. And maybe just to add to that, sort of the more local individuals, governments are, the better they know the sort of local constituents, the more responsive they are, and also accountable to citizens rather than to sort of different sort of national objectives, which is also, as you were saying, Dr. Raz, in the beginning, an important element of the sort of democratic aspect of this. I think, and maybe just to go through quickly, we've been working quite closely with the city of Cape Town, which is my home city, in developing their inclusive economic growth strategy at the moment. And they have sort of built this around 4 key pillars. So the one is what we're sort of talking about quite a bit, is quality service provision, which is sort of the fundamental role of a local government. But it also shouldn't be underestimated in the sort of urban economy as well. So the stability and reliability of basic services, housing, sanitation, water, transport, and then sort of also thinking about the sort of inequality implications of that. How are we making sure that this is going to sort of all citizens and guarding against promoting more inequality and unrest? The second part is around business facilitation, retention, and expansion. So this is, getting a little bit more focused on the urban economy itself, and how do we create like an enabling and welcoming business environment. So that's obviously largely to do with market access and regulations. So one of the interesting things we've seen is in Kampala, the Kampala Capital City Authority rolling out a new way of interacting with citizens. And they had this campaign around treating the citizen and businesses as a client, and just sort of reformatting the way that they operate local government. They're putting the sort of customer first in a sense, and creating these one-stop shops which make it much easier to register businesses, pay for local taxes, making everything online and accessible as possible. But also thinking about sort of business licenses, procedures, access to finance, how are these being made easier for businesses to comply with and set up. The third one is around labor market support. So the sort of obvious ones are around sort of reducing job search frictions, so where they could create sort of job seeker databases to sort of facilitate that job matching, then also working with the education sector, as I was mentioning earlier, making sure that what the sort of private sector is demanding is being met by universities, schools, technicons, and then thinking about sort of practical work experience over and above just sort of learning institutions and that sort of thing. But I think beyond that, also thinking a bit more about labor market support, not only in the sense of sort of education and access to jobs, but also just the environment that people are growing up in, which goes back to sort of public service provision. So the role of social welfare in, developing the labor force, the role of sort of health and safety and community networks and community cohesion in sort of developing a well-rounded labor force as well. And then the fourth one is on stimulating investment. So promoting investor confidence and marketing, and sort of identifying what the city's, identity is and what their comparative advantage is. So I think that links to the sort of local economic development plans that Dr. Malik was speaking about. And what is the sort of key thing that each city is focusing on, and how do you market that and sort of get that across to investors. And I know in Cape Town, I think as Mr. Shah was speaking about, the sort of key place of thinking about where to start is always around the construction sector, and how that sort of, both sort of is building sort of an important sector in the economy, but also, building the city itself and the infrastructure that is really needed. Maybe as a last point, just to say where they are particularly limited is around sort of the mass infrastructure that makes sort of cities more viable and the players in the global economy. So thinking about things like affordable and reliable energy and connectivity to surrounding towns and regions, and the sort of national plan and how cities play a role in the national economic development plans. And I think this is something we're really trying to push for, is to get more national government buy-in to the benefits of urbanization, and how it contributes to overall growth and also to overall financial growth. So we see particularly in a lot of the African cities we work with, there's often a sort of competitive nature between sort of national and local government, and how we sort of bridge that gap by making sure that local governments are not taking away from national governments by raising more taxes and raising more revenues, but actually contributing to the overall sort of fiscal picture. So then, lots of background, but to get back to your point, I guess, about sort of the fiscal issues and flows of funds and how to sort of fund this. And I think that is the sort of critical question. I think there's a lot of different views on how to go about this. You know, the one sort of argument around sort of developing robust own source revenue, which is obviously a critical component of also sort of bridging the gap between citizens and local government and developing that relationship. So local taxes like property taxes, which have been shown to be sort of a very fair and equitable way of raising revenues. But in a sort of realistic sense, those are always going to be, you know, very small at the outset when the investments needed are, you know, extremely large. And needing to be able to foster that sort of own source revenue development, the capacity development at the local level, the sort of relationship building at the local level, with sort of very stable and reliable central government transfers that are, enable the investment in some larger projects. And then I think, you know, obviously thinking about how we can get sort of private finance and attract private finance and international finance into cities as well. And it's a longer discussion around sort of how we build bankable projects in cities, and going beyond that to sort of have bankable city plans, because, you know, being able to generate one project which is financeable by an international institution is of great benefit. But there's a great story, I can't remember where it is in the world, but you know, an amazing hotel goes up on one side of the street and an amazing restaurant goes up on the other side, but you're walking across sort of potholes and, unrepaired streets to get between the two. So needing to think about how we get that sort of holistic finance into cities more comprehensively. But I think I'll stop there, but answer any sort of follow-up questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, that was great. And thank you for the background. I think it was a nice compliment to Amar's comments and addressing Shahzad's questions as well. Amar, just before, because we do have a lot of questions, it seems, so, and a lot of people who want to speak. So, I think, you highlighted Rakshaya is a place where you can really sort of build up that urban environment. There seems to be a lot of economic arguments for developing that region specifically. So what kind of things do you think in terms of sort of, investments or complementary investments do you think are critical? Or I know you mentioned some of them, but particularly to sort of smooth out some of these spatial differences and sort of generate that as a real, and I think there's obviously strong economic arguments for smoothing out sort of differential differences for inequality reasons and all sorts of other reasons as well. So what would you suggest around that? And that would be very interesting.
Sorry, I was muted. Rihanna, thank you for that. I think just to emphasize this, when I look at Rashakaya now, one obvious thing is transport connectivity. Of course, along this line, we have the M1 Peshawar Islamabad motorway, and Rashakaya is just going to be 2 or 3 kilometers, and they're building an exit right now to connect it. And then, of course, I think what we need to think about is, when international firms come to this area, where will their workers live? Who will the workers be? Where will they be trained? So I think that we often fall into the trap of focusing almost entirely on hard infrastructure and sometimes forgetting that you need soft infrastructure as well. For example, if you want to build competitive businesses and you want to bring international workers, they're going to want to think of schools for their children, hospitals, housing, and a certain quality of life. And I think that is possible by making, for example, rail connectivity or special buses along some of the highways to make sure that the workers can be shuttled in and out. So I think those are some of the obvious things I can think of. And then, of course, at the overall governance level, I think we need to think of ways in which local businesses around these areas can actually become part of the value chain. And what I mean by that is, if you look at an industry, for example, if you look at manufacturing of televisions or electronic appliances, what parts of those can be produced locally, what industries are available in and around this area, and how can we get some of our local businesses embedded in those supply chains. In other words, how can they create the quality products that will go into that television, or perhaps once the televisions are put together, to transport them abroad, either toward Afghanistan or to the rest of the country. What kind of companies or logistical supply chains can we create? So I think for that, as I said in my presentation, we need local governments and local level planning for each of these areas to identify what is it that they can offer to this machinery of Rashakai, and then establish coordination mechanisms. So people who are running the special economic zone can actually contribute and explain to districts what kind of support is required and what can be done about it.
Thanks, Amar. I just want to sort of bring in a gender angle, because I know so much of your work is around gender and urbanization. I mean, KPK is a particular cultural context, and of course, we're all very respectful of that. But an important question is that I think in terms of when we look at economies that have grown, and particularly I think about the East Asian economies in particular, gender, including half of the population in the workforce is a very important part of sort of achieving some of those productivity gains and sort of moving up the geese for model of industrialization, so to speak. What is it that, what can cities do within, the context about how to think about creating cities that are more welcoming to women and allowing women some access and opportunity in the labor market? I mean, I think this is a real issue here in Pakistan, because we have such low female.
Yeah, I think first of all, the labor force participation rate of females in Pakistan is among the lowest in the world. And I think when I found that in KP, for example, in urban female labor force participation rate is actually slightly lower than rural, that tells me that there's something about the environment of the city, whether it's the fact that women have greater time burdens, that they don't have the traditional support structure for childcare and things, that they can't leave their children with a neighbor or a trusted relative when they move to a city, and they don't have that structure, or whether they feel uncomfortable or unsafe moving around in the city. I think the mega projects like the Peshawar Metro, and we saw this in the Lahore Metro, has done a decent job in creating a good environment for the transport system to work, at least as far as the vehicles are concerned. Where I do still find across the country problems is in the last mile, which is leaving from your home, getting to the bus station, waiting for the bus, getting on the bus. And when there's crowded conditions, we often see that while men are able to wrestle their way into a bus, it's much more difficult for women, who we know are more likely to be traveling with children. They have more stops on average, and of course they have some peculiar safety concerns. So one thing that government agencies could do, I think, is by that when they're planning for these projects, include more women groups, women in government, women in local governments, provincial governments, to make sure that their particular needs are included in all public service delivery planning, whether it's water schemes in rural areas or large urban transportation projects. So I think that will really make a big difference, because what I see is that a lot of human potential, I think, is wasted. A lot of girls get trained and they are not then able to do their higher education and not able to continue working, which I think long term, I don't see, if you look at East Asia or Bangladesh for that matter, all the countries that are growing, making internationally competitive products and offering services, women are part and parcel of that. And I don't think that we should shy away from creating opportunities for women.
Rihanna, just one question maybe we should ask Shasab, since he's here, because this is a counterintuitive data on that the cities show lower participation of women, and he had earlier said something about the quality of data. So maybe he can say a few words about whether these numbers are credible, and if they are, what is his view of what is underlying these numbers?
Shah. I think Shah Sahab is no longer there, Ji.
Sir, this is Amdan Salim from Urban Policy Unit. Can you repeat the question? Shah Sahab is not available, so if possible, I will respond.
Okay, thank you very much. So my question was that, Amar has pointed out that the labor force participation in cities is lower than in rural areas in KP, which is the opposite of what one sees in most other South Asian countries. So my question was, A, does this make sense, or is it like he said, there are data issues? And B, if it makes sense, then what lies behind this? That should inform policy.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sab. Actually, both. I will say that yes, definitely there are some data issues. The data that we collected through the Bureau of Statistics, I think it is not much reliable. So we need to cross-check the data through other sources. So there may be an issue of the authenticity of the data. And secondly, as Ammar pointed out that in cities we have nucleated families, single families, and the issue of taking care of the child. So mostly female, they don't have the opportunity to go outside. Yes, we can consider them housewives rather than unemployed or something, because they are providing full-time services. If you will measure their services, yes, you can quantify them. In case of rural areas, yes, we have joint families and mostly the labor force, particularly in the agriculture sector. So women are more involved as compared to cities. So both issues, yes, but we need to authenticate the data that we get from various sources. I think it will be a quite reasonable justification for the rural women to have more job opportunities as compared to the women in cities.
So they're involved primarily on farm work.
Yes, on farm work, yes. Definitely in rural areas, we have agrarian economy, we depend on agriculture, and more labor force are required. So male and female both contribute to the economy.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to the panelists. I'm going to open it up to some questions because there are quite a few, but we wanted to start with Mr. Omar Masood Saib from the Urban Unit in Punjab. I believe he has some questions, so I wanted to give him the floor for 1 second.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so, my first, comment and observation is that I would like to congratulate the KP government for being not one step, but more than a couple of steps ahead of the Punjab government as far as revamping their local institutions are concerned for urbanization. They have mentioned hiring of architects at Tehsil Council level. I think this is something which is very important because, this issue has been raised again of resources and local taxation. Well, a lot of local taxation comes to land, but, if you do not have urban planning capacities and, building control available, what is happening is that you are actually allowing unplanned, growth to occur, but at the same time you are unable to tax it. It's only through zoning of land and building regulations that you are able to enforce an efficient property tax mechanism. That is a point which is usually lost, and I think KP is at the stage where it can, by these interventions, will be in the future be able to get a lot more revenue from property taxation, especially of those towns or smaller settlements which were previously very urban, but they have now, which were previously very rural, but have now become very, very urban due to greater connectivity with larger cities, etc. So I think that is one important point, that I want to make. I would also like to now put forward a question, and that is one thing that we have been struggling with here in Punjab is, have you looked at regions? I mean, if we were to, sort of get out of the box of a province and a division and a district, have you looked at a new region from an economic growth perspective? Because if you look at the map of Pakistan, I think KP would also know about itself. Punjab also knows that there are regions of economic growth which do not exactly, align with either district or divisional boundaries. So is there any type of regional planning going on in KP at the moment? Thank you.
I will direct that question to Shah Saab ji, and maybe even Victoria, if you could jump in about regional planning and the sort of externalities that cross sort of provincial level boundaries.
Yes, actually the Urban Policy Unit initiated a project called the Provincial Land Use Plan. And in this project, we are preparing district land use plan of each district. But at the same time, we are combining various districts. Like in case of Peshawar Valley, we have land use plan for Peshawar, Mardan, Charsadda, Naushera, and Sawabi. And at the same time, we amalgamated these districts and prepared a regional development plan for the entire Peshawar Valley, consisting of the two divisions of Peshawar and Mardan. Similarly, we are working with the Asian Development Bank, and again, on the same basis, we have prepared provincial growth strategy, taking the same area, the same urban agglomerations of Peshawar Division, Abbottabad Division, and Southern Division. So in Abbottabad Division, we have the district of Abbottabad, Haripur, and Mansehra. In another urban agglomeration is Mingawara, Sidi Sharif, with Malakan and adjoining cities. So yes, we are working on the concept of regional development. And we have also prepared 3 regional development plans. One is for the central urban agglomeration consisting of the 6 districts. The other one is for Abbottabad, and the third one is for Swat and Mingawara and Swat division, Malakan division. So yes, some initial work has been done on the concept of regional development in KPK.
This is very, very interesting. But I was wondering, I think what the questioner had in mind was whether there are regions that cross provincial boundaries. So it seems to me that the Peshawar, Mardan, Naushera, and to some extent Abbottabad is very much part of Islamabad, Rawalpindi growth initiatives because of the connectivity, etc. So I was wondering whether that is consciously built into planning when you think about the zones that come into that larger region where federal government initiatives are also taking place.
Sir, you are right, but administratively it is not possible. Economically, yes, we can, like Abbottabad is a part of Islamabad and Rawalpindi region. But administratively, the planning policy we are working either on the province, then on the division, and then on the district, and then on the tehsil. So if we have a plan or a regional development plan cross provincial borders, then there will be the issue of sponsoring. What will be the mechanism for sponsoring such projects? Yes, we have, in case of sectoral projects, we have like the motorway, they are cross provincial. But in case of other development projects, due to administrative issues, no, we don't have such plan right now.
So maybe Rihanna, maybe Victoria could give us examples of where these kinds of issues are being addressed in other countries.
Sure, I can come in maybe just on some of the sort of specific issues around transport in that context, but I think it's a really great observation because this happens at every single scale. You know, within a city, you know, wards are outgrowing different boundaries. Different units of local government are, you know, outgrowing boundaries, and then as it goes up on the regional scale as well. And you see sort of the challenges of that when it comes to investment all over the place. So investing in sort of even just a new sort of public transportation system in a city. How do you get that right when you've got to coordinate between sort of overlapping district councils and municipal councils, particularly when there's this rapid urban growth that's going on across most of the developing world. So I think we've got a great paper on this, which I'll post in the link on the sort of urban authorizing environment. But one of the areas where I think a couple of countries have managed to make some progress on this is in the transport sector. So in Nigeria, quite an interesting example in Lagos, where the city of Lagos has been completely subsumed by the regional government, so the state of Lagos. They've sort of become one and the same because the city has grown so rapidly. And to coordinate all the sort of transport efforts around that region, they've developed, I can't remember what the actual name is, but the acronym is LAMATA, which is basically an entity that crosses all different spheres of government, focusing on the issue of connectivity and transport. So focusing on roads, public transportation systems, and other elements of transport as well. But I think this goes beyond transport to a number of different issues where I might not have the same examples. I know they're trying to do the same in Kenya at the moment, but they've had a number of challenges sort of because it's such a new decentralization process, and where particularly around the sort of issue of devolution of responsibilities doesn't match up to the finances. So even when you get that governance structure going where, you know, all the different bodies are represented, the sort of ability to finance these projects is still not, doesn't quite come through. So I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but just some examples.
I can definitely speak to Kenya because I work on a lot on Kenya business. And I think one of the, I think one is the role of intergovernmental institutions. So I think Kenya has a couple of intergovernmental institutions that provide a coordinating role. And that is both, they have something called the Council of Governors. In Kenya, there's 47 counties, as they call them. In Pakistan, we only have 4, so I mean, in that level. So there's a coordination that goes on there. Then there are intergovernmental bodies that exist. As Victoria said, there is a mismatch between financing and institutional structures, but there is mechanisms in place. And I think in Kenya, what we are learning is that there is a lot of these institutions are gaining momentum on their own in some sense, as long as there's this sort of path dependency and strengthening of these institutions as time goes on and they gain momentum. And a lot of the coordination is also informal, partly because at least around Nairobi, for instance, there are like 6, 7 key counties, but the president himself is from Kiambu, which is right there, and he's able to coordinate. And Nairobi, because of its economic importance, there's a big power grab between the center and the counties in terms of doing urban planning for Nairobi. So, yeah, sorry.
One example that I've read about that I know it's different context altogether, but after the Great Depression in the United States, the Tennessee Valley Authority was set up, where initially the federal government stepped in, created an authority and said 6 states along the Tennessee River will get subsidized energy. This was a chronically underdeveloped region. The federal government stepped up, provided some infrastructure, provided environmental stewardship. And the objective was that the authority would sell hydropower to become environmentally sustainable and also economically sustainable. And that's exactly what happened. And in 30 years after that, I think they were able to crowd in several folds more investment into the region. And they did, under the authority, set up a coordination mechanism, not just between local county governments, but also 6 states, all at the same time. So I think this kind of thing is possible. And my argument by showing the Rashakai example and then showing all the map with the distancing was that perhaps we do under CPEC and under the special economic zone need something of that scale and ambition, because short of that, just building industries and expecting that the special economic zone will be self-contained and the benefits will spill over to the regional economies, my view is it will not happen unless we do this.
Thank you, Amar. Do we have time to take, sorry, Victoria wants to say something, but I also wanted to ask Ijaz and the rest of the team if we have time for other questions. There are quite a few questions around that come in. But Victoria, go ahead, sorry.
It was just a quick point, because I think someone mentioned in the chat the sort of political economy aspect. And I thought it was just worth highlighting that, because I think it's a really important point around sort of, creating these governance structures, but also thinking about very clearly about what the incentives for different spheres of government to take part in it, and thinking through that quite carefully, how to sort of incentivize them, what are the sort of mechanisms that incentivize them to get involved.
Yeah, Rihanna, I think by all means, let's take more questions, but I just wanted to just emphasize how important the question is that was asked by Umar Masood, because one thing is when you have development, local government upwards. The other thing is when you have large initiatives at the national level, which have very important regional implications. For example, CPEC-related industrial zones, they are bound to have regional implications, especially in that Islamabad KP area. There's much more of an overlap. Hopefully there will be similar overlaps with other provinces as well, but this is one area where it's going to happen. And therefore, there's a great need to develop the institutional mechanisms so that we have coordination between the federal government and the provincial government and local governments. Otherwise, as Victoria said, you can have a great restaurant on one side of the road and you can have a great something else on the other, and the two don't connect. So I think coordination across governments for these large national initiatives is going to be particularly important going forward. So thank you very much, Umar, for asking that question.
Okay, thank you. Ijaz, I just wanted to know what's the role of the Planning Commission and where that's gone in a sort of more regional and national approach. But I want to go on to the other questions, if that's all right. There's a couple of questions on data, and I thought I would ask that. I think one is, to you, Amar, is about why don't we use household level household surveys to do some of these analytics around urbanization. And I think there was a question about capacity, and not just the data, but also what kind of capacity building do you need around the data in order that, that we can actually leverage the data that we collect or which we're able to use. I know, Victoria, you work on data too, so open it up to both of you on that question.
I'll go quickly. I think that a lot of the data that's publicly available in the public realm is aggregated, at most at the district level. I think we need a system, whether it's through those knowledge partnerships that I was talking about and Victoria was emphasizing as well, where there is a system for local researchers to come and help do some of the analytics based on the needs that the government might express. I think we also need to think about some permission issues around data, which is disaggregated at the household level or even at the sampling frame level from the census. But I do think that the data does exist, and whether that data is reliable or not, what methods go in, I don't know about that. But I also feel that there is, as I tried to emphasize through my presentation, there's other ways, such as satellite imagery, and now increasingly, Twitter and open source data information sources, which do not require reliance on any official sources. And I think you can still do decent analysis from those, and there's increasingly emphasis on that. But yeah, it's absolutely critical point about data.
Maybe just to add quickly to that, I think also thinking about who those official sources leave out and what's not included in those is also an important, well, with all data questions, I guess, an important aspect. But just to re-emphasize, I guess the data disaggregation bit is a huge piece that we're particularly trying to focus on as well, because I think it's a massive challenge, not only just getting city level data, but then sort of thinking, within a city, how do we analyze these different aspects if we're not able to disaggregate further? On the capacity side, I agree with the sort of view of knowledge partnerships and not to sort of replicate what might already be there. I'm sure, there's numerous great universities who are doing, amazing work and have the sort of capabilities to do some of this analysis. It's more about sort of connecting the dots and making sure that research questions of the government are filtering through. And where the capacity has already been built, sort of leveraging that. But I think there's another aspect within government around sort of capacity to sort of interact and analyze that data, and also how it's made available to cities. So the sort of visualization of that data as well. And again, to use the example of my hometown, but there's a lot of work going around sort of data capabilities across the board. So not sort of getting specific economists or data analysis teams in the city, but how do you sort of upskill across the city people's abilities to sort of interact with data and that comes out of it. And also, I think really importantly is sort of building in that evaluation and experimentation of policies from the start. So sort of making sure that when new policies are implemented or new projects are implemented, that the thought process around how to evaluate that and how to collect data around that is sort of integrated into the process. And that just links to a last point on, I guess, experimentations of policy. Slightly off topic, a really important one to note in terms of with all these new things, we really don't know what the outcomes are going to be or what the right answer is, and being able to sort of try something out, make sure we're monitoring it, adapting it when the data is showing that it might not be going so well, and like constantly evaluating and then scaling it, I think is also, it's a really important use of data, and not just sort of collecting data for the sake of it.
Okay, thank you. There's another question on tools, particularly a question on, I think, let me just scroll up and get the question. Wait a minute. I think it was about how important. So how important is it for different government departments to work together, and whether focus on cities need to be developed within each department, or whether you, whether you centralize some of that planning? And I think there was a tool about urban plans, and how can urban plans as a tool be used in planning for better urbanization. So I don't know who wants to answer that question. Those questions.
I'm happy to have a go on the one on urban planning. So I guess maybe that's just to go back to sort of the aspects of coordinating different activities, and the sort of arguments around fostering density. So I think with urban master planning as a tool, thinking about where the different activities that take place in an urban environment are going to be located and how they relate to each other is like it's really the most sort of fundamental thing that one can do as a local government. So thinking through, clustering firms together, thinking about how certain industries which are, maybe extremely noisy or polluting need to be kept away from housing. At the same time, how we need to facilitate access between workers and jobs in certain areas, and then thinking about different industries which might benefit from more of a sort of integrated approach to planning. So something like a hotel or a cafe should ideally be integrated with where people live, whereas something like a big manufacturing plant needs to be separated, and thinking through those sort of zoning elements is really, really important. But I think that the critical thing is really the connectivity between where you're placing the housing and where you're placing the jobs, and making sure that those are really strongly integrated in those plans. And then the final one, just around building regulations, because I guess it's somewhat of a hobby horse of mine, but a lot of developing cities have incredibly stringent building regulations. So compared to sort of the norms, really, really restrictive in terms of even parking requirements. I'm not sure what the case is in Pakistan, but large parcels of land needed as a minimum plot size, and sort of really limiting the height of buildings that one is able to build, which results in massive urban sprawl. It makes any investment in infrastructure, in housing, in transport more expensive, because you're having to buy up much larger tracts of land to do that, and it also it obviously just decreases the efficiency of cities. So thinking about those building regulations as part of that process, I think is really, really important. I can send through some stats. They're quite astounding, the sort of the difference in the regulations between some US cities and some cities in South Asia.
Thank you. That would be interesting. One more question, I think, because we need to wrap up. And there's a question from Ahmed Hassan from Lahore School of Economics. I'm sorry, the other questions I forgot to mention their names, but he has a question where I think this is really for Adeel Shah's team in the KPK government. And he's asking, is there any policy being formulated side by side with housing policy to improve the situation of slums in the urban centers in KPK?
Thank you, Rihanna. Yes, we are also working on the regularization or on the improvement of slums in different cities of KPK. We work with the USAID and conducted a study in Peshawar, Charsadda, Mardan, Kohat, Naushera, Abbottabad, and Mansehra, and identified the slum areas or the depressed areas in terms of urban services. And on the basis of the study, we initiated the KP Inclusive Growth Strategy and the KP Cities Improvement Project. So the KP City Improvement Project is a big project, around about 50 billion rupees, and will provide the urban services or the municipal services in these cities, particularly in housing, in water supply, sanitation, solid waste management. Similarly, we conduct another study with UNICEF in Kohat and one other city to identify the slum in those areas. And also we are in contact with the Human Habitat to promote, to identify and regularize and upgrade the slum areas in various cities of the KPK. So yes, we are the Urban Policy Unit is actively working on the improvement of slums in the different cities of KPK.
Thank you very much. I wondered if Shah Sahib is here, because in the running order, the closing remarks are by Shah Sahib for 5 minutes.
Although Shah Sahib is not available, but I have a question from Ammar. Particularly on the Rishaka Economic Zone, that there is the presumption that the Rishaka Economic Zone will bring prosperities in the urban centers of KPK, particularly in the urban agglomeration of Peshawar Valley. But we need to assess whether the planning we are doing will be successful, because we have other models, like we have the Gadoon Industrial Estate, we have the Industrial Estate in Hyderabad, and we have other industrial estate. And more than 50% of the plots are still vacant. So the Rashaka economic zone will attract the economic activities. How much it will be successful?
Yeah, that's a good point, Adeel. I was going by the assumption that you mentioned because of some of the statements I've seen from the leadership and some of the commitments that we've seen. So while there's been, I think, allocations, if you look at the budget of around $224 million this year, I think this is part of CPEC, and 120 something million. So they've spent, I think, or the allocation so far has been 350 or so million. And the expectations, I think I read some statements, was that it will generate 200,000 jobs. It will bring in $2 billion of investments. And I think you're right that there's been lots of industrial experiences. Even in KP, Hatar is probably the most well-known industrial area. I've from experiences from around the world, we see that unless what Umar Saab and Dr. Ijaz was talking about, the coordination mechanisms, the complementary investments that I emphasized, the connectivity, the planning, I think without those elements, we will not be able to see the successes that we want. Look at the example of Saudi Arabia, for example. I've worked a little bit there last couple of years. They have industrial zones to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. But I think that unless you build these softer, urban amenities, bring the quality of life for the workforce that will come, and integrate your local businesses to the international supply chains, I think you will not have the full impact of Rashakai or any other special economic zones. So while the location is really nice, I think connectivity is great. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to make it successful.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Ijaz, you're muted.
Just a quick clarification from urban unit people in KP. In Punjab a few years ago, when such zones were opened up, there was a great onrush of applications, and the government had to be very careful not to allow these plots to become housing plots. And so a lot of conditions were put in the use of the plots. So I was wondering, the rush of demand that you're seeing and the clamor for more land, have these applications been properly vetted and they're all industrial units, or is this sort of mixed kind of use applications?
Yes, I will second Dr. Ijaz Nabi for his comments. Actually, most of the time we are thinking about the investment or the speculation. People invest in the plots that in future they will again resell the plots and will get some benefit. They are not in any way to be developed or to be industrialized. Similarly, in the case of Hyderabad industrial estates, people invested in the plots not to build industries, but just to invest in the plots for getting gains in the future.
Yeah.
So this may be the case with other industrial zones.
Yeah. And in fact, unfortunately, this increases the cost of doing business for people who want to invest for industry. So we need to be very careful in assessing the applicants and what their objectives are.
I think Omar Masood at the urban unit has asked a question. Can we make that the last question, and then we will close it up? Okay, Ji.
Yeah, sorry. There were a couple of points. First of all, about data. Yes, the data is at crossroads as far as urbanization is concerned in Pakistan. We here at the urban unit sit on a mountain of data, and we sit on it every day, and we will keep sitting on it perhaps in the near future also. So how to get that data flowing where it actually really matters is something which is becoming a challenge, because we just do not have a data policy or data sharing mechanisms. I think that is something which is very, very important. The relationship with data and master planning, I think this is going to be a very critical relationship, because especially GIS data is something which can bring forth those larger questions of urbanization and employment, your residential location and where the jobs are. These are things which about 15, 16 years ago, without the GIS tool, we were unable to sort of demonstrate in an effective way. But the challenge again is that it's not the urban unit which is going to do this thing. The urban unit really needs to process this data for the agencies which are engaged in the process of urban development. And unfortunately over there, they've simply not sort of set up a data infrastructure through which that agency can actually benefit. I can give you the example of Lahore, for example. Lahore Development Authority by now should have had an extensive GIS or a remote sensing capability, but it is not there. And I think there are a lot of missed opportunities which we just are not actually taking into account when it comes to promoting or implementing a particular policy. I think data can be a very, very effective tool. I can tell you, for example, this entire housing construction package, because I've attended like 56 meetings of the Prime Minister so far. It's going to be 1 year of these meetings. Had there been no data and GIS data to show that this package is actually having some effect, I think it would not have sustained itself or would have had the backing of the Prime Minister in that way. So I feel that data can really be used strategically from a political economy point of view. It is one dimension that we have just simply not realized. And unfortunately, again, the issue is that we just do not have a data sharing policy. I would, like Ijaz said, there is an issue of coordination at large in government at the moment. And the coordination problem has exacerbated over a period of time. And when it comes to data, this coordination problem is extremely severe and acute. I just could not emphasize this point any stronger than this. And I think that is the thing which is holding us back from really doing great urban planning and especially in the dimensions that you are looking at, like economic growth, or or a regional economic growth, and these things. There is no demonstration effect that we can take through the data that we have accumulated so far, and that is something that we need some assistance and help with. That's all on as far as I'm concerned this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Omar. Let me. I think you've raised a very important question, and we are struggling with this all across. And I think the key to this lies in policy, the way we formulate policy. I've been emphasizing, different levels, including in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, that we must evaluate what we do. We need to know, when we say that such and such subsidy should be given, we should be evaluating whether that subsidy was given to the right people and whether we got the results that we expected from that subsidy. We have, for a variety of reasons, and this has to do with the way institutions have been financed and external support that we've received from the World Bank and Asian Bank and others. Many organizations have developed the capacity to gather data, but that is still not filtering into the way we formulate policy. Policy is still not evidence-based. It's still not being evaluated for impact. And I think till that mindset changes, we will continue to have this problem of having data on the one hand and not knowing what to do with it on the other. So you've raised a very important question. I'm struggling with it on the energy subsidy issue. We are struggling with it on many of the social welfare programs that the government has started. This is a generic issue, and I think this needs to be addressed. And people like yourselves, who I'm sure will rise very fast in the policy circles. I hope as you move above on the upper rungs of this ladder, you will continue to hammer this point that, we've got the data, we should use it to inform policy.
Okay. Thank you, Ijaz. I think that's very important. I'll take this Umar's comments and as an opportunity, and yours, Ijaz, to end the session. I wanted to thank all the panelists and all the team at both CDPR and SEED for organizing this, and obviously Adeel Shah Ji and his whole team at the urban unit in KPK for participating, and it was a very interesting and useful discussion. Both Amar and Victoria, thank you very much, as well as everyone else who participated, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to gather, Ijaz. So thank you, and I will end that session if that's okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you, SEED, for co-hosting this.
Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't say that. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Rihanna. But whether we will get copy of the presentation or
I think it was recorded. Sorry.
Amar, we will.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I'm happy to pass it along.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.